All right, everyone. Good afternoon. Today is August 17, 2020, and welcome to our GenCLEO Student Showcase. My name is Julieta Rodrigo. I am the Associate Program Manager at the CLEO Institute, and today we're going to have a very exciting event. We have lots of our GenCLEO students that are ready and excited to share with you what they know and how you can be a part of their projects. So we thank you all for joining. This webinar is being recorded and being streamed on Facebook Live if you'd like to catch those recordings later. Now, if you are new to the CLEO Institute, we do have a short video that we're going to play as people continue to trickle in. It's going to give you a brief introduction as to who the CLEO Institute is and what it is that we aim to accomplish.
I want you to ask yourselves those tough questions, the ones we avoid, how we want to live, what do we want for. I want you to ask yourselves those tough questions, the ones we avoid, how we want to live, what do we want for our children, what do we want for our planet.
Our atmosphere is so finely tuned for what we need, and we're treating it like a dumping ground, a sewer. The health impact of climate change is a global problem, and we see the results of that on a local level.
If we fail to act now, then we will leave behind a fundamentally degraded planet for our children and grandchildren, a planet that resembles the futures that have been portrayed in dystopian Hollywood films, unprecedented inundation of our coastlines, droughts, floods, heat waves, superstorms. That's the future that we will see if we fail to act on climate.
The CLEO Institute was founded in 2010 with the drive to educate and empower South Floridians to act on climate. Founded by Caroline Lewis, a science teacher by training, her vocation led her to understand what was causing people's apathy towards the glooming climate crisis: knowledge.
We're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction.
Today, the CLEO Institute is the #1 nonprofit organization for climate education, engagement, and advocacy. Through programs like the CLEO Speakers Network, CLEO trains people to become climate speakers by breaking down the science, impacts, and solutions. CLEO's educational efforts are backed by a world-class expert advisory council of scientists, environmentalists, teachers, and government officials. While the world is already feeling the impacts of our changing climate, not everyone is feeling it the same way. CLEO is a leader in the climate justice movement, providing the resources and tools to the most vulnerable communities in South Florida that are on the front lines of the climate crisis.
I wanted to be an outreach for them.
Building communities' resilience through women is the cornerstone of our Empowering Resilient Women program. By teaming up with community members like the YWCA, CLEO is able to empower and educate women on how better to prepare for more extreme weather events like hurricanes while building community. CLEO works to remove barriers and build a wider coalition to fight climate change across faith-based communities, elected officials, and municipalities, schools, and cultural organizations. One of the most important voices that CLEO continues to amplify is that of our youth.
What do we want? When do we want it? Now!
Their GenCLEO program meets regularly with students across the region, training them to be climate ambassadors in their schools and communities.
Dear elected officials,
this is a crisis. Do your job. We'll be watching.
CLEO recently launched its Climate Resilient Schools initiative to bring their program into the classrooms while building a robust climate curriculum for Miami-Dade public schools. CLEO continues to expand its engagement through multimedia outreach, including television commercials, social media, and billboards. With statewide campaigns like the Florida Climate Pledge,
I care about climate change, and I care about climate change because it affects everybody regardless of race, culture, and ethnicity. Because I'm passionate about the success of my future.
I like the CLEO Institute because it takes the time to educate people about the importance of climate change and the things that we can do to improve our world.
You can have your voice heard too. Fund our climate action work today. The future of Florida is in your hands.
Today's GenCLEO student showcase will feature Sabrina Hu, Asher Sochaczewski, Charlotte Stuart-Tilley, Maya Gowda, Emily Vo, Jean Dela Peña, Marquelle Ogletree, and Nia Ogletree. We're really excited to share with you what they know. We're going to start with Sabrina. Sabrina's going to share her screen in just a moment, and you can drop your questions in the chat box as the students go along in their presentations, and we will have Q&A after each student. We're ready for you, Sabrina, when you are.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to start with the problem. Clean water is something that every person in the world needs. Unfortunately, over 1 billion people around the world lack access to safe drinking water, and tap water and electricity are compromised after a natural disaster. We live in Florida, and right now we're currently in hurricane season, and that means there's going to be a lot of issues with power outages and buying bottled water. And globally, hundreds of billions of bottled water are purchased a year, and over half ends up in oceans or landfills. So my project aims to clean water in a reusable, sustainable, portable, and simple way. So I know that UVC light can kill pathogens by forming thymine dimers in the DNA. So my goal was to utilize that UVC light and then power it by solar and then put it all in a water bottle cap. That way it can be used by any person in the world. So I have 3 engineering goals in mind. One was that it would be solar powered, which was helpful when times of no or limited electricity, and it would remove a barrier for people. Battery storage. Water purification can still work when not in the sun, and I wanted an automatic power off, which turns the UVC light off after the water is sterilized, so it doesn't just light on continuously. So here was my design execution. I wanted the solar module. Originally, I didn't want to have a battery, but the solar module was too fickle, so it wouldn't provide enough current to power on the UVC light. So I decided to pair it with a solar lithium ion charger, and then that would power a battery, and then it would draw from that battery to power the UVC. So here's what my circuit looks like. The purpose of the Arduino circuit is to power on the UVC LED with the push of a button and automatically power off the UVC LED after the program time. One of the issues that I had was that this button would be placed inside the cap, so no one would be able to access it. Well, after scouring electronic forums, I found that you could attach a larger separate tactile switch to the smaller one on the board, and then it would reach all the way to the cap. One of the issues that I had again was that this button was too short to reach through the wall of the cap. So I ended up using an eraser cap, which was the exact same size as the button as an extension. So being able to use your resources like that is very important for creating projects. So here's what my prototype looks like. This is what it looks like. This is a side view. Here's the button where you activate it. And then here is the cable, and you'll see why it's external in a moment. This is the solar module on top of the cap. This is the solar module captures energy from the sun, and it converts it into electricity. And here's what the inside of the cap looks like. And then because this cable is external, you can also use it to power electronic devices like your phone or any tablet. And this really helps during emergency situations because, you know, after there's a power outage, what if you want to check up on your friends, make sure they're doing okay, or you have to call some emergency service. So this would really help during those situations. And also if you just rely on your technology or your phone dies a lot, this would really help with those situations. And this cap can also pair it with any standard aluminum can, turning what would have been waste into a device for water purification. And because cans are found in abundance nearly everywhere, people don't need to rely on the actual bottle. And the reason why it can be that way is because the UVC LED that I'm using was actually pushed towards the side. Originally, I was a little saddened by this because it looked unprofessional because it wasn't right in the middle. But I remember staring at a Coca-Cola can and I was thinking to myself, hey, isn't that drink opening also to the side, and I brought it home with me and I put the cap on top, and lo and behold, it fit perfectly on top. So this unintended consequence had created an incredibly useful feature of my project. So on to testing. I originally tested the cap against E. coli, which yielded promising results. There were no E. coli bacterial colonies after around 3 minutes. But since the cap would be used by people who drink water directly from nature, I wanted to simulate that, and I tested my water against, I tested the project against water from Wakulla Springs. So the water was poured into 5 equal size aluminum cans, and each can was exposed to the UVC LED at different durations varying by 1 minute. Here's what that looks like. So this is the control. This is 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and 4 minutes. You can visibly see the reduction in bacterial colonies after each minute. And I graphed it, and you can kind of see like an exponential decrease. My raw data, and here is what Wakulla Springs look like. This is where I retrieved my water. And I conducted an ANOVA test to make sure that my results were statistically significant, and I found that the F-stat is greater than the F-critical value, and the p-value is less than 0.05, indicating that all my results are statistically significant. By minute 4, the UVC LED had killed 99.46% of pathogens. And a proof of concept for my project is the SteriPin, which looks like this. It is a handheld battery-powered device that uses a UV lamp to disinfect water. And the total cost of the cap was about $56 for me. If purchased straight from the manufacturer and in bulk, the price would hopefully decrease and become more accessible to individuals. Through the work of a nonprofit or a company, it could potentially be distributed to people in dire need. And since the UVC LED can only kill pathogens, I built a water filter to remove particles such as dirt or heavy metal. And it contains 2 steel coffee filters and activated carbon, and it looks like this. And so this project accomplishes reducing waste and recycling water with renewable energy. And so in summary, the cap is solar powered, can clean water, power electronics, and pair with aluminum cans. It is applicable to any person in the world. It could be a game changer for someone living in a developing nation. Not only can it help people with limited resources, it can also help people with abundant resources. It's useful for you, me, hikers, campers, travelers, military units, and just everyday people. And that's what I personally really love about my project. It's inclusive, simple, and great for emergency situations. So in conclusion, the water purification system was successful in eradicating pathogens in minutes. This UVC LED can turn on with the simple press of a button and automatically power off after the program time. The system successfully draws power from solar, incorporates an automatic timer, and contains a storage unit. There is a water filter built to pair with the UVC LED. The cap can charge electronics and accommodate drink cans, and it's cost-effective, portable, and can be used by any individual in the world. So I just wanted to quickly say, I feel like this project could really help us right now because of hurricane season, and because we are in a kind of a climate crisis right now. We need sustainable technology like these to help reduce waste, to help use alternative energy. And that's also why I think STEM is super important. It's helping us solve global challenges. It's helping us improve our quality of our lives. So I encourage anyone who is even remotely interested to just dive headfirst into it. Take a STEM course. You might really enjoy it. I personally didn't really care for STEM when I was growing up, but after just exploring more of it, I grew to really love it. And I hope you all do the same as well. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sabrina. We do have 5 minutes for Q&A. If anyone is curious or would like more information about any aspects of the project, you can drop your questions in the Q&A chat, and we will read those to Sabrina as they come in. Sabrina, we have a question from Caroline Lewis. How do we scale this project?
Well, right now it is in prototype stage. So what I would want to do in the future is have a professionally made manufactured product that can be used for pilot tests, and then see how it works, how other people find how it works, and then hopefully get it manufactured. I have a patent pending for this, so I can maybe even get it commercially used sometime in the future. Right now it is just a kind of a small thing, but I do really hope to turn it into something bigger.
Thank you, Sabrina. How did you get inspired to do this project?
So around 2 years ago, I learned about this girl. Her name was Ann Makasinski. She was 15 years old when she created this flashlight that could be powered by the heat of your human hand. And I thought that was so amazing. And it kind of inspired me because I was like, hey, this 15-year-old can do something really amazing and create this. Maybe I can do something like that too. And I kind of looked at my own personal experiences, what issues we had, and that was hurricanes and natural disasters and just being in Florida. And so that's how I kind of got the idea for my project.
Thank you, Sabrina. One more question. Have you presented this invention to any angel investors?
Not yet. I've been entering this project into competitions and kind of seeing where that can lead me. I was actually recently featured on WCTV. I don't know if any of you have seen it. And I have applied to Shark Tank, but that's kind of a long shot. We'll see if they actually call me back. But I really do hope to reach out to more people and see if anyone would be interested in my project.
Thanks, Sabrina. Another question. How durable or sturdy is the cap? Would it need replacement often?
I would say it's pretty durable or stable. I think as long as nothing breaks, like if you don't smash it with a hammer, it should be lasting. I think for several years.
We have 1 more minute for questions for Sabrina. Thank you, Sabrina. It was wonderful to see your work. We are now going to prepare for our second presentation, led by Charlotte and Asher. Whenever you're ready, share your screen and commence.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us today. Asher and I are giving our presentation on voting and phone banking, and I'm going to be doing the voting portion, specifically talking about alternatives to voting on Election Day, because of course this year the pandemic is going to make it difficult for us to safely vote in person at the polls. So the first alternative to voting in person is, of course, voting from home, also known as voting by mail. Now, especially lately, there have been a lot of misconceptions surrounding voting from home or voting by mail, and many people believe that it prevents your vote from getting counted properly or it risks your ballot secrecy. But if you take the right steps, your vote will be secure and secret. Because of the physical paper trail that a mail-in ballot uses, it's actually generally more secure than voting electronically. And because the pandemic will make it difficult for us to safely vote in person for voters and poll workers, their average age is 70, so we're talking about a very at-risk demographic, it's important that we find alternative ways to elect our officials from being in person. Voting from home is one great way to minimize the spread of COVID-19 in our communities while also staying politically active. So, this sounds great. How do you do this? Your first step is, of course, going to be to get your ballot. So you can request one from your local supervisor of elections, but sometimes they send one to you automatically. Remember to request it at least 2 weeks ahead of the election to give it time to be mailed back and forth. Also, remember to update your voter registration information. If it's not updated and say you have moved, then the address could be wrong and it could be mailed to the wrong house. So fill out the ballot at your convenience, but make sure you fill it out ahead of mailing it 1 week before the election, or if you miss the deadline for mailing it, drop it off at a polling station before 7 p.m. on election day. Do this as soon as you can, because a lot of people will put it off and their ballot doesn't make it in time. If you're interested in learning more, you can look at the Vote by Mail page by the Division of Elections in Florida, and it'll tell you more specifically about Florida. So, if you feel uncomfortable with mail-in voting, there are other ways. You can vote early. So this is a really good way to avoid the crowded polls on election day if you still want to vote in person. Now, Florida has 8 days within their mandatory voting periods in 2020. These dates could have more days within them, but these ones are required for every district to implement. I would check with your local supervisor of elections to see what they say, because this could be different, but you can definitely depend on these days for early voting. Early voting isn't much different than normal voting. You want to make sure that you can vote early in your state. You can in Florida, but other states don't let you. And find out where your nearest early voting polling station is, as well as the dates of your local early voting period. And then it's pretty easy, straightforward. You go to your nearest polling station within the early voting period. The National Conference of State Legislators has more information about early voting and how you can do this. And they also give you in-depth information about your state too. So why is this important? We're in CLEO. So we want to vote pro-climate, and one of the most simple ways to take political action is to vote. So whenever we talk about climate action, this should be a priority. We want to vote out climate deniers and support the campaigns of politicians who have plans for climate justice. Because this audience probably has a lot of young people in it, I wanted to add that it's especially important to encourage young people to vote. In 2016, only 46.1% of youth ages 18 to 29 voted in the presidential election, which is pretty small compared to the 65 plus voter turnout of 70.9%. However, this is a good sign that in the 2018 midterm election, and midterm elections tend to have fewer voters in general, a record high of 28% of youth voters showed up for the polls. Again, we need to increase youth voter turnout. This is very, very important. So how do you vote pro-climate? Well, you want to start by researching the candidates on the ballot. Some good starting questions to be asking would be like, what have they said about climate change and the climate crisis? Or what I commonly find is the case, have they even said anything at all? Compare the solutions, actions, and views of climate change that candidates have. Who has the most effective plan to combat climate change? Who has the most understanding of intersectional climate change? Who is the most active in environmental issues? So you're going to want to vote for the candidate that has the strongest and most well-informed climate justice plan and views. And you don't have to stop there. You can continue to support them. Buy a yard sign to put in your front yard, promote them on social media, or volunteer for their campaign. Every vote counts. So youth voices are especially important, and one of the best ways that we can have our voices heard is by voting. Even if you're too young to vote right now, you can always encourage your older friends and adults to vote. So I encourage my family members, my grandparents. We had a conversation about that last week. And whenever I turn 16, I'm going to get pre-registered to vote. You have to be 16 to do that, but this makes sure that whenever you turn 18, you're already registered and you don't have to worry about registration. Everyone deserves to be heard, and voting is one of the best ways to do that. So we need to especially be focusing on encouraging young people to vote. Now I'm going to turn this over to Asher, who will talk about phone banking.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. So hi guys, my name is Asher, and like Charlotte said, today I'm going to be talking to you guys about half phone. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Charlotte.
Stop. Here we go.
Okay, thank you so much. So first of all, what is phone banking? So phone banking is really when you just make calls to people, then you try to convince them to vote for the candidate you are phone banking for. So yeah, next slide, please. So why should you phone bank? So one-on-one call with voters is a great way to help a political candidate you support win. If you can't vote, like most of you on this call probably can't, considering that this is like the younger audience, this is especially a good opportunity, but speaking from experience, it's actually great fun to phone bank too. So yeah, next slide, please. Oh. Okay, thank you. So why I start phone banking? So I start phone banking because I know that political candidates have a lot of power and they can help us fight for climate change. And since I can't vote, this is a great opportunity to help political candidates I support. So yeah, next slide, please. So how did my first experience of phone banking go? So I was definitely very nervous, like everyone else who's ever started phone banking for the first time, but there was no school where after a few months speaking from experience. And at the end, I really enjoyed it, and since then, I've phone banked, I think, like 11 times more. So yeah, I definitely enjoy it. Okay, next slide, please. So, how old do you have to be to phone bank? So this is a great thing about phone banking, unlike voting. There's absolutely no age limit, and you can see on like the bottom right that there's people of all different ages on the phone banking call. So yeah, next slide, please. Okay, awesome. So how does phone banking work? So speaking from experience, you'll most likely use Blue Talk. My phone bank, I always use Blue Talk, and what FuTalk does is it basically gives you a script when talking to people, so you really don't really need to know any information. You just follow the script. With that being said, if you have a new phone bank, I do not recommend you follow the script exactly, because then you kind of sound like a robot. But yeah, and on the bottom right, you kind of see like the logo and stuff. So yeah, next slide, please. So should you research the candidate before phone banking? So you definitely want to research them and at least make sure they align with your values. Okay, next slide, please. So here are some key tips for phone banking. So first of all, you want to identify the supporters. If someone already has their mindset on the other candidate, you don't want to waste their time trying to convince them to vote for the candidate you're supporting. Just say thanks and have a great day. With that being said, if someone's still undecided, you really want to try to convince them to vote for the candidate you're supporting. I'll go into those details a little later in the slide. Then you want to nail the vote plan. So really make sure that they know where they have to go vote. Did they fill in their did they fill in their ballot yet? And do they need transportation? And how are they going to get there? Just make sure they know how they're going to vote. And lastly, you want to make sure that you have a drink and a snack with you, like the people on the right, and have some nice oranges. So yeah, just so this way, because how the FuTalk dialer is set up, the more people on the call, the faster the dialer goes. So if you have to leave, obviously that's fine, but make the dialer go a little slower. So that's why I recommend that you have a snack and drink with you. Anything else you would need. Okay, next slide, please. So here's a little bit of what you can expect when phone banking. So you can expect hang-ups, angry people, open confused voters, very thankful voters and people that are undecided, and obviously some more people I didn't mention for sure. And yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so how to handle angry calls. So this is a little bit of the less pleasant side of phone banking. It doesn't happen too often, and as long as you remain polite, you shouldn't have this problem too often. But you will get it. I can't lie to you on that. So what you want to do is you just want to apologize, even though it's not your fault, because this might get them to relax a little more, and then offer to remove them from the call list. And this way, you just don't just say you're going to remove them from the call list, actually do it. Because it's not going to let people know, be really annoyed if someone else calls them again. So yeah, next slide, please. So how to handle bots. So yes, believe it or not, sometimes robots will answer you when you're phone banking. For example, in my case, I've heard funny things like, I'm a hot air balloon evaporates to my girlfriend. I've heard this several times. So basically the point of these bots is to waste your time. So what you want to do is you just want to hang up and remove them from the list, so this way no one else has to get their time wasted and then go to the next caller. So yeah, next slide please, Charlotte. Okay, so as mentioned before, I'm going to talk about undecided voters here real quick. So what you want to do when you get an undecided voter is just tell them a little bit about the candidate, why you're phone banking for them, but you don't want to talk about that too much. What you really want to do is ask them what issues are important to them, so this way they can know what the candidate's stance is on these issues. And then you may also want to compare them a little to the candidate they're running against. So yeah, next slide please. So I actually had trouble finding organizations you could phone bank with, I'm not gonna lie. The organization I phone bank with personally, and I've had good experience with them, is the Sunrise Movement. So you guys can phone bank with them, but there's also https://join.mobilize.us. And they're not really like a phone banking organization, but you could definitely find phone banking opportunities there with other organizations. So yeah, thanks so much for listening, and I think me and Charlotte are going to have a few minutes to answer questions. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you both. Please drop your questions in the chat and we will read them to our panelists as they start coming in. We received our first question, and Charlotte can try answering this first, and then Asher. From James, I saw a poll that came out today showing decreasing trust in votes for the presidential election. Do you think this is true among youth or first-time voters too? I believe youth are able to see through false and unsubstantiated statements that scare people about voting. But I wonder what concerns youth like yourselves might have, and what could be done to regain voters' trust.
I would say that definitely in general, people have I could see there's a decline in trust. There's definitely been a decline in youth involvement in voting in the past couple of years, which is really sad. But I'm hoping that because of all the awesome movements that have been happening in the last 4 years, that we would get more people showing up for the polls. But I definitely think there is a concern for voter security among people, and especially I could see it in more progressive youth movements. Asher, do you have any comments on it, or?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Sorry about that. So yeah, I agree with what Charlotte said there, and what James said. Yeah, there has been a decrease in trust, and I've heard this before when phone banking. People are like, well, how do you know this person's actually gonna tell the truth about what they're saying. But yeah, hopefully we will regain that trust, and hopefully we'll see more people coming out and vote, especially young people. So yeah, thanks, good.
Thank you both. We have a question directed to Charlotte from Caroline. What do you think about recruiting youth to volunteer at the voting locations?
Yeah, I think that's definitely really important. I don't know. I think it actually depends on your supervisor of elections and whether or not you could participate in that. But I definitely think that, like, bringing your kids to the polls, my parents always brought me there, and so I've always been very comfortable with polling. And so I think that if we had youth volunteering, that it would have the same effect, and we definitely see people more comfortable with voting when they're young.
Asher, we have a question for you. Can you share with us one of the best and one of the worst experiences you've had while phone banking?
Yes. So, unfortunately, I've had experiences where people are very annoyed and ask me to remove them from the call list. So that wasn't the best experience. They got very mad at me, but usually I have more good experiences than bad experiences, so that's a good thing. And the best experience I had, I guess, was convincing someone who's undecided about the candidate I was phone banking for to actually go and vote for that candidate. So that was a really good experience. Thanks for the question.
We do have an additional minute if anyone would like to ask more questions. Well, thank you all. We do have one message from an attendee that would like to do a short PSA. You can return your absentee ballot at polling locations in your community. If you do have concerns about the delays through the mail system, you can return them in person. And it's just as safe and just as secure, and you can track it in a similar way. Thank you both, Charlotte and Asher. Let's get ready for our next presentation, led by Maya and Emily on the topic of climate gentrification.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, Emily Vo and I will be presenting a slideshow on climate gentrification. Both of us were a part of the Fridays for Future Miami internship, and we were both interested in climate gentrification because we didn't know much about the topic, but we did know that it was affecting Miami-Dade and Broward County. We first wrote a research paper and then created a presentation to inform people about gentrification. In this presentation, we will be focusing on how gentrification affects both Miami-Dade and Broward County. What is climate gentrification? Climate gentrification is when properties become more valuable than others due to their ability to better accommodate settlement and infrastructure in the face of climate change. Gentrification is perpetuated by the interest of capital gain as lower-income communities are pushed out of their neighborhoods in order for developers to build property. This process hurts disadvantaged communities, which are vulnerable to other issues. These communities are mostly made up of people of color and happen to be hurt the most from climate change. There's a common misconception between racism and gentrification, how they correlate. So we included a quote to clear up any type of confusion. Racism does not drive gentrification, capitalism does. Racism is the outcome of gentrification, it is the effect.
And to kind of further explain climate gentrification, we can first look at the 2018 Harvard study, which examined and laid out 3 explicit forms of climate gentrification. So the first form involves wealthy developers and home buyers migrating into lower income neighborhoods due to the community's favorable location or low risk of weather damage. The second form includes expensive investments in resiliency efforts of living areas vulnerable to natural disasters. However, the high cost causes low-income households to move away because they can no longer afford to stay. Then the final form entails similar conditions of the previous example, as resiliency plans improve certain areas, which they are then deemed more favorable in terms of real estate, which becomes inaccessible for lower income communities and also attracts wealthy developers. So these three forms of climate gentrifications are evident throughout numerous locations across the US, but it's especially prevalent here in South Florida. And one effect of climate change that has increasingly prompted gentrification is the rise in sea level and natural disasters, such as hurricanes and flooding. And you can switch to the next slide. Yeah. So by 2050, annual losses from flooding related to climate change and sea level rise could increase to more than $60 billion a year. And as such, coastal areas where many wealthier residents reside are at risk due to the rapid sea level rise. Then, as a result, many wealthy homebuyers and even developers look inland to areas with higher elevation. However, these areas are historically populated by minority and lower income communities. Climate change puts those who are most vulnerable at risk as their communities are forced to move, resulting in displacement.
Many effects of climate gentrification incite population displacement. Effects such as weather damages, rising sea levels, and increasing heat temperatures are all driving factors of population displacement. Unfortunately, this happens in many parts of the world, including Miami-Dade and Broward counties. Effects of population displacement may include shortage of necessities such as food and water, a decrease in economic growth, and conflict. In this presentation, we will be focusing on how climate gentrification takes place in Miami-Dade and Broward County, as well as solutions that should be set in place. Miami is one of the first cities in the US to start studying gentrification and finding solutions for the problem. Here's a map of Miami-Dade County. Communities that deal with gentrification the most include Liberty City, Overtown, Little Havana, Little Haiti, and Alapata. Not all citizens can afford homes in low elevated areas or want to move away from their homes and their culture. It is unfair that residents of these communities are subjected to move.
Yeah, and unlike Miami-Dade County, there is a lack of research on displacement and climate justice within Broward County. Although research on climate gentrification is fairly new to Miami-Dade, it has brought significant attention to environmental injustice within the community. Broward County would benefit from this similar research, which according to Keelan Ushad and Nancy Meyer, they did research and provided recommendations for Broward County, which are listed in the image to the right. And many of, No, that's all right. And many of these recommendations include beginning with a research strategy that will inform efforts and generate maps that illustrate neighborhood level differences or inequities specifically in Broward County. And you can go to the next one, yeah.
There are a variety of solutions that cities can start implementing in order to stop climate gentrification from worsening. This includes packing a population of residents into buildings, placing markets, stores, and schools on higher elevated lands, instilling community land trusts, which will give owners a renewable lease on a certain amount of land without having to put it for sale. Cities can establish house allowances and declare an official housing state of emergency. For example, Catalyst Miami, a nonprofit organization, has been working towards declaring an official housing state of emergency for the city of Miami due to the COVID-19 pandemic and climate gentrification. This will focus attention on all of the communities which are facing the negative impacts of gentrification and will help promote equality for those people. How you can help. There are 4 main ways to help Miami-Dade and Broward County fight climate gentrification. First, help low-income communities of color most vulnerable to disasters rebuild and recover. For instance, when there is a hurricane, you can volunteer with either the New Florida Majority or the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. Both are grassroots organizations that help with disaster relief assistance. In addition, they promote political power and climate justice in marginalized communities in Florida. Second, you can fight for housing justice with the Right to the City Alliance. This helps disturb gentrification processes in targeted communities. Third, you can donate to organizations combating gentrification and climate change, such as the New Florida Majority and the other organizations that we have stated. Lastly, you can help educate communities about climate gentrification through research or presentations. This will help spread awareness and help citizens suffering from gentrification. Thank you for watching. Do you have any questions?
Thank you both. You can put your questions in the chat and we will read them as they come in. We have a question from Brenda for both Maya and Emily. Maya, you can go first and Emily can respond after. Do either of you plan to work in this area in your future careers?
For me, I'm not sure if I would pursue this in my career, but I definitely want to volunteer in educating Miami-Dade and Broward County about climate gentrification, especially the communities that are affected by the situation. And I will definitely be volunteering in those areas in my next 3 years of high school.
And hi, I'm Emily, and I think in the future, I definitely want to study more about the environmental part of it and more sustainable ways to solve and combat the gentrification issue, because I definitely want to help bring more attention, especially to Broward County, because that's where I reside. But yeah, definitely in the future, I'd be really invested.
Thank you both. Let's get ready for our next presentation. This is going to be our last one of the afternoon, and it's going to be hosted by Jean, Marquelle, and Nia, who are going to be talking about social justice and how it relates to climate change.
All right, so hello everyone. Thank you for having us today. My name is Jean.
Hello, I'm Marquelle.
Hi, I'm Nia. We're from Tallahassee, Florida, and today we're going to be talking to you about how climate change is disproportionately affecting communities of low socioeconomic status. So before we get into the impacts that climate change has on low-income and Black and Brown communities, we wanted to briefly talk about environmental justice. So having environmental justice would mean that environmental policies that are put in place would affect everybody equally. So regardless of how much they make, where they live, or what they look like. And this is important to me because I don't think we can really talk about climate change without talking about climate justice as well. The racial and social injustices that exist in our society today are only worsened by climate change. And I think it's important to be aware of this and be aware of who's affected by it, and also to continue fighting for social equality, because all of these issues are interconnected.
Like Nia said, environmental justice and social justice are intertwined, and this issue is important to me because I'm interested in the historical consequences of redlining or residential segregation, income inequality, and the lack of access to healthcare, and how each of these factors worsen the already severe consequences of the climate crisis. I think it's important to bring awareness to this issue because lower income people, people of color, and other marginalized groups are often the lowest contributors to the climate crisis, but they're the most affected.
So going off on what Marquelle was saying, I feel that we should bring light into these issues, especially for me, after hearing stories about Super Typhoon Haiyan that happened in the Philippines in 2013. Many of the citizens were stuffed into poverty-stricken cities, such as in my hometown, Tacloban, in which those same people could not afford a home or much less health care. So millions of families were heavily impacted by this Category 5 typhoon. And if it weren't for the United States giving them the resources they needed, then they wouldn't have recovered as quickly compared to if they didn't have any help. And I wanted to relate that to this topic because some people fail to realize that global warming is greatly affecting our planet, and that puts our lives into jeopardy. As I mentioned in the previous slide, global warming is the root of the problems we're discussing today, as temperatures have increased at an alarming rate over the last few decades. And I just want to emphasize that through this graph on the bottom of the slide here. And the main cause of this is due to increased greenhouse gas emissions, in which Earth's atmosphere traps those same greenhouse gases, resulting in a warmer planet. And what will happen is extreme heat will occur more frequently, affecting not only the food that we eat, but also an increase in extreme weather, and that could affect down to where you live.
So yeah, like Jean said, extreme heat can impact us in a lot of different ways. So first of all, health. Heat-related illness can occur if you're out in the sun for too long, if you're becoming overheated, doing a lot of heavy lifting, maybe wearing heavy clothing in the sun. All of those things could contribute to a heat-related illness. And things as serious as heat stroke can be life-threatening. And then also vector-borne diseases. So vectors are organisms that carry and transmit diseases. So think of mosquitoes and ticks, and they thrive in warm, humid climates like we're seeing because of global warming. So an increase in their populations would also lead to an increase in the risk and a higher possibility of vector-borne diseases being more frequent in Florida. And extreme heat also has social impacts. So low-income communities are much more vulnerable to extreme heat because the federal government doesn't require air conditioning units in public housing, although they require heating. So the majority of public housing residents are actually Black and brown people. So, you know, they become much more vulnerable. Also, Latinx communities are have a higher risk because the majority of crop production workers and construction workers do happen to be a part of the Latinx Hispanic community. So again, that's higher risk for them. And then also think about people that rely on public transportation. I know here in Tallahassee, the bus stops, most of them do not have shade coverings. They're directly in the sun, no trees around. So there's another risk factor there. And finally, in access to healthcare, Black and brown people have historically struggled to have access to healthcare. So if they were to have one of these illnesses or diseases, not only are they less likely to be able to afford that, but also less likely to have the quality healthcare that they deserve.
So air pollution is a significant consequence of human activity, and lower income people are more likely to be affected by air pollution because they live in areas with poor air quality. For example, industrial sites are often built near lower income communities. Low income people are more likely to live in inner cities where there's less trees and there's more ground level ozone, and these areas happen to be densely packed. And if you're lower income, you may be unable to afford air purifiers and move away from these polluted areas. So if you're constantly breathing in toxic air, that can affect your lungs and other parts of the body, and it can exacerbate respiratory illnesses. So asthma is a very common respiratory condition that is prevalent among Black and brown people. It can make it more difficult to breathe if you have asthma. And There's already the existing lack of access to healthcare that we've discussed before. So if you add air pollution on top of that, it can have detrimental effects on your health.
Okay, so being a Floridian, you already know that Florida is known for being humid, reaching its peak during the summer season, which is expectedly the heart of hurricane season as well. And extreme heat and air pollution can affect the same warm, moist air by creating greater, stronger hurricanes. Over the last 4 years, there have been a total of 11 hurricanes, a category 3 and above, that have hit the United States, and 5 of those had made landfall in Florida. A major hurricane happened recently in 2017 when Hurricane Irma, a category 5 hurricane, devastated numerous cities, countries, and homes. But the ones that are most impacted by these disasters either live in communities by the water or communities that have less resources. And what I mean is specifically low-income communities, because they're more likely to live in areas with greater vulnerability to natural hazards. To go on, those living by the ocean are affected by this, as coastlines are eroding from sea level rise. Storm surge and flooding after hurricanes also contribute to sea level rise, which could displace millions of people who don't have a home already. And those in low-income communities are also affected, as they were less financially prepared before the hurricane, thus making it extremely difficult to recover afterwards. And there's a few main reasons as to why that is. And the first reason is lack of financial support. So FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and what they do is they offer financial aid to homeowners, but not to renters. And also people without flood insurance are not offered aid. And the second reason is disproportionate disbursement of resources. And basically people who need it most don't usually receive or don't have enough of those same resources. And in the next slide, I just wanted to show an example of how vulnerable Floridians are to these impacts. As you can see, Florida is ranked #1 for both number of homes at risk by the storm category and reconstruction costs after the hurricane.
So the climate crisis has significant impacts on agriculture. Because of climate change, we're seeing more severe droughts, extreme flooding, extreme heat. And all of these factors affect crop success and crop yields. We're also seeing a loss of land due to desertification and erosion. And you can see examples of that on the bottom of your screen, and as well as deforestation. All of these factors threaten the global food supply. And this is significant because poorer people are more likely to be affected, because if they've already had a difficult time obtaining food now as it is, the climate crisis and the effect it can have on crop production in years to come can make it more difficult to obtain the food that they need to support themselves and their families. And to put that into perspective, 1 in 8 people currently in Florida struggle with hunger. So that's about over 2 million people right here in our state. And this can have significant implications nationwide and globally. And there's additional economic consequences that the climate crisis can have on agriculture, since many people around the world, and especially in our state, depend on the agricultural sector for their livelihood. For example, many Latinx populations depend on agriculture, as well as migrants from the Caribbean and Latin American countries, and undocumented people. An example of the climate crisis and how it affects agriculture is here in Florida, we've had an increased frequency of hurricanes and an increase in the severity as well. The storm surge and the flooding that we've seen can affect those crops, and in turn affect the income that farm workers are able to bring in for their families. So if we keep seeing more severe hurricanes, that can have significant effects for farm workers. And another interesting fact that I found is that higher carbon dioxide concentrations reduce nutritional quality in foods. I first want to say that carbon dioxide is very important, because otherwise plants would not be able to go through the process of photosynthesis, which is very vital for plants to grow. However, too much carbon dioxide can be harmful because it's changing the chemical composition of crops to the point that vitamins and minerals are being depleted, and this can lead to increased malnutrition. If you look at the graph on your right, you can see examples of staple crops and some of the minerals that can be expected to be depleted if CO2 levels continue to rise in 2050.
Okay, so let's talk about some solutions to these issues. Since we have talked about the issues, we don't want you to feel like there's nothing you can do, because there is. So Marquelle?
So the most important thing you can do is contact your representatives. For example, you can contact your city and county representatives about ensuring that there's more coverage at bus stops for people who rely on public transportation so they're not exposed to extreme heat. You can contact your city and county representatives about cooling centers as well, which are free facilities for people to go into to cool down. And an example of a cooling center are libraries. However, libraries are losing funding, so you can work with your local representatives to ensure that there's funding for these cooling centers and more of them. You can also encourage and advocate for tree canopies, so there's more shade coverage in public spaces, as well as hurricane preparedness. Here in Leon County, where we live, our county government has an initiative where they provided supplies to people in need. And this year, virtually, they had webinars that prepared people to know how to be safe during a hurricane with the pandemic going on. We put a link in the chat of how you can find your local officials.
Okay, so going off on hurricane preparedness, you can prepare before receiving the aid of your government. You can make a plan. Be sure to have the resources you need prior to the hurricane. And you can do this by making your own natural disaster kit. And I can post a link in the chat. But also check your family and friends, make sure that they're also ready for a hurricane, and help educate those who may not know what to do.
Also, buying and eating locally, so supporting those local small businesses, local farmers markets. This not only reduces like your carbon footprint, but also supports the local agricultural economy that is impacted by climate change. And finally, getting involved even more than just this GenCLEO showcase. There are tons of organizations across Florida and across the country that you can participate in. Personally, I've interacted with the Citizens Climate Lobby, Our Climate Florida, Rethink Energy Florida. There's a Sunrise Movement in Miami. So, you know, any of these great organizations you can get involved with to take even more climate action. So thank you everyone for tuning in to our presentation, and we hope you learned something new. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you all. We do have a question, so Nia, you can go first, followed by Marquelle and Jean. You can give your input on this. From Caroline, do you see the parallels between the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic, especially as it relates to things like justice inequities and the need for strong leadership to heed the science?
So yes, I've thought about that a lot. People not really believing in climate change, not really wanting to take action until they see it happening to them, is definitely similar to the COVID pandemic, because I've heard people, you know, calling it a hoax, thinking of it as a conspiracy theory, kind of like that, and so not really wanting to wear a mask, not wanting to protect other people, because they haven't experienced the virus and don't believe it. And also the COVID-19 pandemic definitely exposed a lot of inequities in like healthcare and employment, and so the same type of thing I think is happening with the climate crisis.
Yes, like Nia was saying, there's definitely we're definitely able to see the inequities in healthcare and just people's living situations from COVID-19 and as well as the climate crisis. And I think another important thing to keep in mind is the need to take action. I mean, early on in the COVID-19 pandemic, some states were reluctant to close, or we even opened up too early, in my opinion. However, I think it's important that we have to take steps now, because if we don't act now, then the consequences that climate change can have on people and communities can be more detrimental if we don't take action now.
Yeah, I agree with both Marquelle and Nia. I wanted to go off on what Marquelle was trying to say. I honestly didn't realize how bad the climate crisis was until I joined GenCLEO, and this is why I'm doing this PowerPoint, or well, this presentation with these two wonderful ladies over here. I just wanted to spread more information about how bad it's gonna get and how bad it will get if we don't take action today. And I wanted to mention how a lot of our leadership, especially our government, they don't really heed to science. And I feel that we need that leadership in government so we can really progress as a country. And so, yeah, that's my take on the question.
Thank you. We still have 1 minute to receive questions if any of you have additional questions for our panelists. Well, thank you all for presenting. I'm going to conclude this event. Thank you all for joining. If you haven't been involved with the CLEO Institute, I highly recommend that you do. You can check out our website on cleoinstitute.org. You can view all of the programs that we have, no matter your age and interest. There is a program that can teach you new things and introduce you to new peers and new friends, and also use your talents to benefit the climate movement. So I definitely encourage you to get involved. If you learned anything from this presentation today, I also encourage you to share that with someone. So whether that's a friend, a neighbor, a family member, a colleague, send them a text, send them an email, and start the climate conversation, because that is one of our most important superpowers when it comes to the climate crisis. So I will be here if any of you have any questions, but other than that, we are concluded for the afternoon. Stay safe, and we look forward to meeting you all soon with the CLEO Institute. Thank you for joining.